and welcome to this month's synth tutorial with computer music. This month we're going to use the Zebra CM synthesizer to create the perfect riffing synth sound that could be used to run all the way through your song with a particular sequence. So let's begin by loading up your DAW and loading up an instance of the Zebra CM. We're then going to go to the menu, which is the display at the top of the synthesizer, and you can see if you click there's a drop-down menu. We're going to select Init for Initialize at the bottom. This will reset the entire interface, so we have a default starting point. Once reset, the volume of the Zebra CM can be a little bit on the hot side, so we're going to move down to the Master Control volume setting, which is on the bottom right-hand side, click and hold, and drag that down to a value of 50. Now when we talk about values, you'll see that at any time you change one of the pots on the interface, you'll see the value is represented at the top. The first step of creating our sound requires going to oscillator number 1, which is on the top left-hand side of the plugin. We're going to leave the volume set to a value of 100, and we're going to leave it set to a sawtooth waveform. However, we're going to induce a degree of aliasing of this waveform by clicking on the number 2 located within this section. This creates a second waveform to thicken up the texture quite nicely. Next, we're going to move over to the Oscillator 2 section and turn the volume up to a value of 100 so that it mirrors oscillator number 1. We're also going to use a relatively complex wave shape on oscillator number 2, so click and hold in the waveform display, drag the mouse upwards until the upper display reads a value of 14.40. We should now have a sound like this. And you can hear that's quite a metallic sound, largely due to the presence of the complex wave shape that we have in oscillator number 2. To avoid any phasing issues, we're going to detune the pitch of oscillator 2. So go to the Detune pot on the top right hand corner of oscillator 2's section, click and hold, and drag the mouse up to a value of 35. It should then sound like this. Now that's quite a large amount of detune, but the reason we're detuning it to that extent is not only to avoid phase cancellation, but also because we're going to be inducing a degree of pitch modulation in the next step. We want to use envelope number 2 to detune the second oscillator. To do this, we move to this tiny little turquoise circle which is next to the tuning pot, we click and hold on it, and we drag it down to a value of just -1. You can see that by default, this parameter is actually already assigned to envelope 2, so we can leave that as it is. We now hear a sound like this, but we're going to be changing that shortly once we get around to changing the envelope settings. Before we do that, let's move across to the filter section. And for this particular sound, we quite like the filter type, which is called LP for low pass, Vintage 2. Once selected from the drop-down menu, change the cutoff control to a value of 28. One of the nice additional features of this particular filter is it has an overdrive setting, and we're going to induce a bit of overdrive distortion at this stage by setting this pot to a value of 18. If you try and play the sound now, you won't actually hear any sound, because the sound is fully eliminated by the level of the cutoff control. To bring our sound back to life, we need to move across to the Assignable pot, which has got ENV2 written underneath it, and we're going to set that to a value of 106. Once we've set that value, you should now hear the sound again. It's now time to adjust our envelope settings. Envelope 1 is going to be controlling the amplitude, or if you prefer the volume of our sound, and we need to make a couple of alterations here. So leaving the attack pot set to a value of 0, change the decay pot to a value of 65. Turn the sustain pot to a value of 0, and place the release pot at a value of 66. We're now going to make some similar alterations to envelope number 2, but envelope number 2 is being used in two capacities. In the first instance, it is going to oscillator number 2, and it's very slightly applying a pitch modulation to the oscillator here, but also it's being sent in the direction of the filter, and it's controlling the cutoff control via this pot that we have in the filter section. Either way, the settings that we need for envelope number 2 are attack set to 0, decay set to 48, sustain also set to 0, and the release pot set to 48. Now our sound is actually finished, we have something like this. The last part of the equation for this patch is to add some nice effects on the back end. Now we're doing this in a very subtle way by sending via a bus to a secondary channel, or an auxiliary channel if you prefer, and we're applying two effects. We have both a delay and also a nice long reverb, but they're set quite low in terms of their overall volume. So we go from having a sound which sounds like this, which is completely dry, to a sound which has a little bit of support. So our next task is to create or compose a really cool riff to go with that sound. Musical success awaits. We'll see you next time.